The Battenkill is one of Vermont's most storied rivers, and coming back is a great place to go fishing in search of trout. In recent years, that wasn't always the case, and a lot of that had to do, and still does, with what's going on along the riverbanks. Is there enough protection for trout and other wildlife species provided by the natural environment, like trees or woody debris in the river? We go along with Jim Henderson, the Environmental Program Manager for the Bennington County Regional Commission, to learn more about what can be done to protect the fish and wildlife for the future, and keep our local rivers, not just the Battenkill, a fun place to go and recreate in, whether it's tubing or kayaking or fishing. What is the health of the Battenkill like these days? I mean, there was a time when the trout population was struggling. There were concerns about riparian buffers and the overall health of the river. Where are we at now? And what are some of the challenges that may still exist?
I think most of the fishermen on the river would tell you that the river's health has increased dramatically from when we noticed a significant decline in the trout, specifically the brown trout, the middle class age bracket. And we determined that a large part of that was due to lack of in-stream habitat. This was all science-based with studies that were done with the Vermont Fish and Wildlife. Specifically, Ken Cox led a team of really highly qualified, dedicated biologists. And the message that the Battenkill Watershed Alliance is now spreading is trying to reestablish healthy riparian buffer zones. And a riparian buffer zone would be the land between the top of the bank of the river and going outwards towards another type of land use. If you think about rivers, they've always provided travel corridors, whether it was for humans when Native Americans would use them for, travel up and down rivers. Wildlife and fish also use rivers for travel corridors. So the Battenkill Watershed Alliance, we've been around for about 25 years, and we first started answering and addressing the issue of lack of in-stream habitat by building and installing structure in the river for trout and other wildlife species to take refuge so that they could avoid predation, increase and make better spawning habitat. And also the trees themselves, they provide a lot of significant benefits to trout, believe it or not. I often say that fish grow on trees. And you think about the type of cycle between a trout and a tree. Throughout the years, especially in the growing season, when you have insects, pollinators, grasshoppers, ants using the trees, a lot of them will fall into the river, and that's instant food for the trout. Trout predominantly eat bugs. As the tree gets older and it may eventually fall into the river, then the bugs start to grow on the tree itself, and they produce their eggs and what we call nymphs, and they become the adult insects. That is predominant food source for trout in the early stage of a bug's life. So the more trees that we have along the river will provide better habitat for the fish themselves, better habitat for reptiles, amphibians, mammals, birds. It will also help to create a more flood resilient river by allowing the water during a severe flood stage to leave the river, reconnect the river to its floodplain, allow the water to spread out, slow down. It should be obvious to people that if you have more vegetation while a flood is occurring and the floodplain is acting as, say, like a large holding tank, a bathtub, that vegetation helps to slow down the water, helps to reduce the force of the water, and it can help filter out a lot of the debris, whether that is vegetative debris like wood and bushes. It could also be demolition debris from a house that may have been impacted. A healthy floodplain with a healthy riparian buffer zone literally acts as a filter during a flood stage. One of the main missions of the Battenkill Watershed Alliance right now is to plant as many trees as we can along the river to reestablish a healthy riparian buffer zone. And a large part of that requires cooperation from landowners. So we are now focusing on landowner and municipal outreach to educate people that what they do on their land can impact both the river as well as the land themselves and their neighbors downstream. So we try to convince people that they don't need to mow their entire lawn right down to the river bank, that a small opening providing access or a picnic area is adequate, and they'll be doing the river themselves and their neighbors a huge favor by protecting and reestablishing a riparian buffer zone.
Now, Jim, I noticed you have a pair of clippers and a shovel here. You're saying though those are your two favorite tools? I mean, what do we use the shovel and the clippers for?
I would say my favorite tool when I'm along the Battenkill or one of its tributaries is my fishing rod. However, anytime I go near the river, whether it's fishing or working on habitat restoration, I always have a pair of these. And predominantly what I'm going after is Eurasian bittersweet, which is a vine that grows up. It's a non-native invasive species, and it grows in the trees and eventually will suffocate and pull the tree down, killing it. A lot of people know this vine because it's the favorite Thanksgiving wreath that people will make out of the vine and the bright red and orange berries that they produce in the fall. That is my enemy number one when it comes to invasive species. So sometimes I literally need these to cut my way through this viney structure to get to the river to fish. Then of course I got my shovel, and this is for digging the holes where we will put in the trees and the shrubs. In the last 10 years, between the Battenkill Watershed Alliance and the Bennington County Conservation District, we've planted approximately 7,500 trees in the Battenkill watershed. When we do a planting, we rely on a lot of hands because many hands makes light work. So we have good cooperation with volunteers, including Burr & Burton. They do a community service project every year, and the Boy Scouts have been very helpful. And then we also work with established organizations and partners, including Vermont Fish and Wildlife, Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, Trout Unlimited. We can get a lot of trees in the ground if we have a good group of people to help us do that. And one problem that has been occurring and perhaps becoming much more of an issue is the dryness through the summers. And we're now focusing on 2 times a year where we try to get in the majority of our plants, in the early spring and in the fall. We'll plant in the summertime if we have a willing landowner who will water the plants, especially if it's like within a short distance of their house. But in an area like this, or say an abandoned hayfield or pasture, when we put in 500 stems, that's a daunting task to try to water them when we're in the midst of a drought, say in August, as has happened in the last few years. So we're trying to narrow down the time of year when we plant so we can get the best survival rate. Well, traditionally, if a large tree were to fall in the river, either a canoeing company or landowner would try to remove it from the stream. And that was a very large part of what Ken Cox was addressing with lack of in-stream habitat. Through our outreach, we have made a very good working relationship and partnership with the existing canoe liveries, where they fully understand that that the trees in the river, as long as you can safely paddle around them, are good for the river. And they all, frankly, their business depends on the river being healthy and beautiful. So we've gotten through a very strong message with the recreationalists. This poster was developed by Courtney Cox, who is a biology, fisheries biologist with Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. And it's basically saying exactly that. Large woody debris is not debris, it's trout habitat. And we have developed a protocol working with municipalities and the Green Mountain National Forest and the road crews, where if a large tree does fall in the river, first we will determine whether or not it is a existing hazard, public safety hazard. And if it isn't, then we'll try to convince the landowner to leave it in place. If it is a hazard where it would go completely across the river and you can't get around it, then we will try to remove as little of that tree as possible to create a safe passage. When a new landowner purchases property on a river, quite often they may make some changes to the river and they don't consider their impact. And I'm mostly talking about clearing the vegetation so that they can look at the river from their front porch or their front yard. When I know that there's been a new property acquisition, I will go knock on the door and give them our brochure and say, please be a Battenkill River steward. Here's some of the things you should consider. Don't remove your vegetation right to the top of bank. Do not plant anything but native species. So that has been a very successful means of getting our message out, literally one-on-one conversations. And the fact is, I firmly believe most people want to do what's right. They just need to know what is right and what isn't. And once they get that message, they will do what it takes to make their river frontage more flood resilient, stabilize their banks, and in many cases, provide better fishing.
For more information about all of this, visit the website of the Battenkill Watershed Alliance at www.bkwa.org. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.